20 doctors, someone whispered, and not one of them can save him. The words didn't echo. They sank, heavy and final, into the polished marble walls of the penthouse suite overlooking the glowing skyline of Seoul, where silence carried more weight than noise ever could. Kang Jae-hyun, the most feared and respected man in the city, lay motionless on a hospital-grade bed imported from the United States, his body still, his face unnaturally calm, as if sleep had claimed him without permission. Monitors surrounded him in a semicircle, their soft beeping the only proof that life still lingered somewhere beneath the surface, thin and fragile like a thread stretched too far. 20 of the best doctors in South Korea stood in that room, each one handpicked, flown in, paid more in a day than most people earned in a year, and yet none of them could agree on what was happening. One pointed at the heart rate, steady but strange. Another argued about neurological response. A third adjusted his glasses and murmured about rare syndromes that didn't quite fit. Their voices overlapped in low, controlled tones, but beneath their professionalism was something they couldn't hide. Uncertainty. And uncertainty, in a room like this, was the closest thing to fear. Near the far wall, a long table held stacks of medical reports, scans, and tablets displaying data no one seemed able to decode completely. A pen rested on top of a document that no one wanted to touch yet, though everyone knew it would have to be signed soon. Outside the room, security stood like statues, their earpieces silent, their eyes trained forward, because even in this moment, power demanded order. But inside, power was slipping inch by inch, breath by breath. At the edge of the room, unnoticed, invisible in the way only certain people learn to be, Naomi Carter moved quietly with a mop in her hands, her sneakers soft against the floor as she worked the edges of a space that didn't belong to her. She kept her head slightly lowered, not out of submission, but out of habit, the kind that forms when you spend your life in places where people don't expect you to exist beyond your function. She had been in Seoul for less than a year, taking whatever work she could find, sending money back home, surviving quietly in a city that never slowed down for anyone. To the doctors, she was background noise. To the security, she was clearance level low enough to ignore. And to the man lying in that bed, she was nothing at all. Or at least, that's what everyone assumed. The air in the room felt too clean, too controlled, like it had been stripped of anything human. Naomi paused for just a second, her grip tightening slightly on the mop handle as her eyes lifted, not to the doctors, not to the screens, but to Kang Jae-hyun himself. Something about the stillness didn't sit right. It wasn't the machines, not the readings, not the sterile explanations filling the room. It was something quieter, something off in a way that didn't have a name yet. She tilted her head, just slightly, the way someone does when they hear a sound others miss. One of the doctors spoke louder now, breaking through the tension. "We're running out of time," he said, his voice tight despite his effort to stay composed. Another exhaled slowly, shaking his head. "There's nothing more we can do." The sentence hung in the air like a verdict. Across the room, a man in a tailored suit stepped forward, his hand hovering over the document on the table, the one that would make everything official. His fingers trembled, not visibly, not enough for anyone to comment, but enough to betray what he refused to say out loud. Naomi's eyes shifted again, this time catching something small, almost invisible. A flicker, not on the monitor, but on him. She froze. The mop slipped slightly in her hand, the faint sound of it against the marble floor barely audible. But in a room this quiet, even the smallest noise carried. A few heads turned, annoyed at the interruption, their expressions dismissive before they even registered who made the sound. Just a maid. Just background. Just someone who didn't belong in this moment. Naomi didn't speak. Not yet. But her eyes didn't move away from Kang Jae-hyun. Because whatever the 20 doctors were seeing, she wasn't seeing the same thing. The faint scrape of the mop against marble lingered longer than it should have, just enough to draw a few irritated glances from the men who believed they were holding the line between life and death. And in that instant, Naomi Carter felt the familiar weight of being seen only when she made a mistake, never when. She noticed something that mattered. One of the doctors nearest to her turned his head slightly, his expression tightening with quiet annoyance, as if her presence itself disrupted the precision of the room. "Please be careful," he said, not unkindly, but without looking at her again, already returning his attention to the glowing monitors as if she had disappeared the moment he dismissed her. Naomi lowered her eyes again out of habit, her hands steadying the mop, but her mind did not follow the same obedient pattern because that flicker she had seen did not match the stillness everyone else had accepted. It had been small, almost nothing, the kind of movement that would not register on a screen or a chart, but her instincts refused to let it go. Across the room, the discussion intensified. One doctor stepped forward, pointing a scan on a tablet, explaining in measured English that the neural pathways showed no meaningful response. Another countered that the metabolic readings suggested the body was still compensating, their voices layering over each other in controlled urgency, while the man in the tailored suit finally picked up the pen from the table, his movements slow, deliberate, as if delaying the inevitable by seconds could somehow change the outcome. Naomi's gaze drifted back to Kang Ji-hyun, not to his face at first, but to his hands, resting at his sides, still perfectly arranged, and then to his chest, rising and falling in a rhythm that seemed steady, but not entirely natural. She tilted her head again, the room fading slightly around her as she focused on the pattern. There was a pause there, a subtle hesitation between breaths that did not align with the numbers displayed on the monitor. Her brow furrowed, just slightly, confusion mixing with something sharper, something closer to recognition. She had seen breathing like that before, not in a hospital, not in a place filled with polished surfaces and expensive equipment, but somewhere. Quieter, more personal, somewhere where people did not rely on machines to tell them what was happening. A memory brushed against the edge of her thoughts, incomplete but persistent. Behind her, one of the doctors exhaled and shook his head again. "We cannot wait any longer," he said, his tone final now. "Prolonging this will not change the outcome." The man with the pen nodded once, his jaw tightening as he positioned the tip above the paper. The room seemed to hold its breath with him, a collective pause before something irreversible. Naomi's grip on the mop tightened again, her fingers pressing into the worn handle as that same flicker caught her eye once more, this time unmistakable, not on the monitor, not in the data, but in the smallest movement of Kang Ji-hyun's fingers, barely perceptible. A twitch that came and went so quickly it could have been imagined, except she knew it was not her. Heart gave a single, sharp beat, and for the first time since she had entered the room, she did not look away. The sound of the pen touching paper echoed louder than it should have in the silence, and something inside her refused to stay quiet any longer. Not yet a voice, not yet a word, but a certainty forming, fragile and dangerous, that whatever the 20 doctors believed they understood, they had missed something that was right in front of them, something alive, something waiting to be seen. The pen had barely begun its descent when Naomi Carter's voice broke through the silence, soft at first but clear enough to stop the motion mid-stroke. "Wait," she said, the single word hanging in the air like it did not belong there, like it had slipped past every unspoken rule that governed this room. The man in the tailored suit froze, the pen hovering just above the paper, his eyes lifting slowly, not in anger yet, but in disbelief, as if he had misheard, as if the interruption could not possibly have come from where it did. Several of the doctors turned at once, their expressions tightening, confusion giving way to irritation as their gaze landed on her. The woman by the wall, the one with the mop, the one who was never supposed to speak. Naomi felt every eye in the room settle on her at the same time, a pressure that would have forced most people to step back, to apologize, to disappear again. But the image of that subtle movement, that flicker in Kang Ji-hyun's fingers, held her in place stronger than any fear. She swallowed once, her voice steadier now. "He is not gone," she said, and this time there was no mistaking it. The reaction was immediate. One of the older doctors let out a short breath that was almost a laugh, not amused, but dismissive. "Excuse me," he said, turning his body fully toward her, his tone polite on the surface, but edged with something sharper underneath. "You should not be speaking right now." Another doctor shook his head slightly, already turning back to the monitors as if her words did not deserve a response. "We have assessed every possible parameter," he said, his voice controlled, final. "There is nothing more to evaluate." Naomi took a small step forward before she could stop herself, the mop still in her hand, the contrast of it against the sterile precision of the room almost jarring. "You are looking at the machines," she said, her eyes moving from one doctor to another, "but you are not looking at him." The words landed differently this time. Not loud, not aggressive, but precise in a way that made a few of them pause. Just for a second, the man with the pen lowered it slowly, not setting it down yet, but no longer writing, his gaze shifting between Naomi and the doctors, measuring something he could not quite name. "That is enough," the first doctor said, his patience thinning now. "Security will escort you out." The word escort hung heavier than it should have. 2 guards near the door shifted slightly, responding without needing further instruction. Naomi felt the movement behind her, felt the moment closing, the last chance slipping away, and something inside her refused to let it end like this. "His breathing is wrong," she said quickly, the urgency breaking through now, her voice stronger, sharper, cutting through the room in a way that surprised even her. The doctors stilled again, not because they believed her, but because of the certainty in her tone. "There is a delay," she continued, her eyes fixed on Kang Ji-hyun. "Not on the monitor, but in his chest. It pauses too long between breaths, like he's trying to respond but cannot complete it." A younger doctor frowned slightly, his attention flickering back to the patient, something in the description catching his interest despite himself. Naomi took another step, the guards hesitating now, uncertain. "In his fingers," she added, her voice lowering but not weakening. "They moved, just now, not a reflex, it was different." The room shifted, not visibly, not dramatically, but enough that the certainty the doctors had held just moments ago began to fracture at the edges. The older doctor scoffed softly. "Involuntary muscle activity is common," he said quickly, as if closing the argument before it could open. But the younger one did not respond, his eyes narrowing slightly as he looked back at Kang Ji-hyun's hand, then at the monitor, then back again. The silence that followed stretched, thin and fragile, and for the first time since the decision had been made, no one moved to finish it. The silence did not break all at once. It shifted slowly, like a crack forming beneath something that had once seemed unshakable. The younger doctor stepped closer to the bed without asking permission, his eyes no longer on the charts but on Kang Ji-hyun himself, studying him the way Naomi had, not as a collection of data points, but as a living body that might still be trying to communicate something. "Show me," he said quietly, not looking at her. But the words were meant for her, the older doctor immediately straightened, his expression tightening with controlled disapproval. "This is unnecessary," he said, his tone sharper now. "We have already established the condition." But the younger man did not step back, his focus narrowing. "Just a moment," he replied, his voice calm but firm in a way that suggested he was no longer asking. The room held still again, tension stretching thin between authority and doubt. Naomi hesitated for only a fraction of a second before moving closer. The mop left behind now, forgotten against the wall, her steps careful, aware of every eye following her, judging her, waiting for her to be wrong. She stopped beside the bed, close enough to see the faintest details, the subtle rise of his chest, the slight tension in his fingers, details that had been overshadowed by machines and expertise. "Watch his breathing," she said softly, her voice no longer trembling, because now she was certain not to monitor him. The younger doctor leaned in, slightly, his gaze tracking the rhythm of Kang Ji-hyun's chest. One breath, then another, and then there it was, a pause, small but distinct, longer than it should have been, his brow furrowed. Not in confusion, but in recognition. "There," Naomi said, almost a whisper, but it landed with precision. "It hesitates like something is interrupting it." The older doctor exhaled sharply. "Irregular breathing patterns are expected in this state," he insisted, but his voice lacked the certainty it carried before, because now he was watching too, whether he wanted to or not. Naomi shifted her attention to Kang Ji-hyun's hand, her eyes narrowing slightly. And his fingers, she continued, "It is not random." The younger doctor followed her gaze, his eyes fixed on the still hand, waiting. The room seemed to lean into that moment. Every sound fading except for the soft, steady beeping of the monitor. And then, just as before, it happened. A faint movement, a subtle tightening of the fingers. Not enough to trigger any alarm. Not enough to register as significant, but unmistakably there. The younger doctor inhaled sharply. "That is not consistent with complete unresponsiveness," he said, more to himself than anyone else. The words cutting through the room like a quiet revelation. The older doctor's expression hardened, but he did not interrupt this time, because now he had seen it too. The man with the pen lowered his hand, completely, placing it back on the table without realizing it, his attention fully captured, the certainty that had filled the room minutes ago, dissolving into something far more dangerous, doubt. Naomi stepped back slightly, not out of fear, but because her part had been said, her eyes still on Kang Ji-hyun. "He is trying," she said, her voice soft again but steady. "You are just not reading it correctly." The younger doctor straightened slowly, his mind already racing, recalculating. Everything they thought they knew. "If this is not neurological shutdown," he murmured, "then we may be looking at something else entirely." The older doctor finally spoke again, but this time there was hesitation beneath his authority. "What are you suggesting?" he asked, the question directed not just at the younger man, but at Naomi as well, as if, for the first time, she was no longer invisible in the room. The answer did not come immediately. It hovered there, unformed but pressing. Because if she was right, then 20 doctors had missed something fundamental, something simple, something human, and in that realization, the room fell into a deeper silence than before, not the silence of certainty, but the silence of realization, the kind that changes everything. The question did not demand an answer. It demanded certainty, and for a brief moment Naomi Carter felt the weight of every eye in the room pressing against her. Not with dismissal this time, but with expectation, something far more dangerous, because now if she was wrong, there would be no quiet return to invisibility. She would not simply fade back into the background. She would be remembered as the interruption that delayed the inevitable. She drew in a slow breath, her gaze steady on Kang Ji-hyun as she searched for the memory that had been forming since the moment she noticed the irregular pause. It came not as a clear image, but as a feeling. First, a recognition of something she had seen before in a place far removed from polished marble and controlled air. "It is not his brain," she said finally, her voice calm, measured, and the words landed heavier than any raised tone could have. The older doctor's expression tightened again, ready to challenge, but the younger one remained still, listening. "Then what is it?" he asked, his voice lower now, stripped of earlier certainty. Naomi shifted slightly, her hands resting at her sides, no longer holding the mop, no longer hiding behind it. "It is his breathing," she said, "not the rhythm you are reading, but the way his body is trying to complete it." She glanced at the monitor briefly, then back to Kang Ji-hyun. "The machine shows air moving, but his chest is hesitating, like something is interrupting the signal before it finishes." The younger doctor's eyes sharpened, his mind connecting the observation of possibilities he had not fully considered. A partial neurological block would not present like this, he murmured, almost thinking out loud. Unless, he stopped himself, the thought incomplete but growing. The older doctor crossed his arms, his skepticism still present, but no longer absolute. "You are suggesting a misinterpretation of respiratory response," he said, his tone cautious now. "Based on what exactly?" Naomi did not answer immediately, because the truth was not something that sounded impressive. It was not built on years of training or complex terminology. It was simple, human, and that was why it had been overlooked. "My mother," she said quietly, and the room shifted again, not because of the words themselves, but because of what they implied. "She had a condition." Naomi continued, her voice steady but softer now, not the same but similar. Her breathing looked normal if you watched the monitor, but if you really watched her, there were pauses. Moments where her body was trying to respond but could not complete the signal correctly. The younger doctor nodded slowly, his eyes returning to Kang Ji-hyun. "A disconnect between neurological signal and muscular execution," he said, the language now catching up to what Naomi had described. If that is the case, then the issue may not be total failure, but miscommunication within the system. The older doctor exhaled slowly, the resistance in his posture easing just enough to allow the possibility to exist. And if that is true, he said carefully, then we may have been treating the wrong problem. The words settled heavily, because they carried more than just a new theory. They carried the implication that 20 experts had overlooked something fundamental. The man in the tailored suit stepped closer to the bed, his gaze fixed on Kang Ji-hyun, no longer divided between the document and the room, but fully present now. What would that mean? He asked, his voice controlled, but urgent beneath the surface. The younger doctor straightened slightly, his mind already shifting from doubt to action. It means we need to reassess immediately, he said, his tone gaining strength with each word. If this is a signaling issue, then there may still be a way to stabilize the response before further deterioration occurs. Naomi said nothing more, because she had already said what mattered. Her eyes remained on Kang Ji-hyun, watching, waiting, as the room that had once dismissed her now began to move again. Not with the certainty of before, but with something far more powerful, the willingness to question itself. And in that fragile shift, the outcome that had seemed inevitable just minutes ago began to unravel. The shift from theory to action happened faster than anyone expected, as if the room itself had been waiting for permission to move again. The younger doctor stepped forward with renewed urgency, his earlier hesitation replaced by focus. We need to isolate the signal pathway, he said, already reaching for a tablet, his fingers moving quickly across the screen as he pulled up detailed neural response data. If the issue is not total failure, but interference, then we are not dealing with loss. We are dealing with distortion. The words carried through the room, changing the energy, redirecting it. One of the other doctors moved beside him, no longer arguing but assisting, scanning through the data. With fresh eyes, searching not for confirmation of what they already believed, but for what they had missed, the older doctor remained still for a moment longer, his arms still crossed, his authority challenged not by confrontation, but by the quiet persistence of something he could not dismiss. Then slowly, almost reluctantly, he stepped closer as well, his gaze sharpening as he leaned in to observe the same details. Increased sensitivity on the neural feedback, he instructed, his voice steadier now, reclaiming control, not by denying the new possibility, but by adapting to it. The monitors flickered as settings adjusted, numbers recalibrating, subtle variations appearing where before there had seemed to be none. Naomi stood where she was, no longer moving, no longer speaking, because the room no longer needed her voice to continue, but it had needed her to begin. Her eyes remained fixed on Kang Ji-hyun, watching not the screens, but him, the rise of his chest, the faint tension in his fingers, the small pauses that had started everything. The younger doctor leaned closer, his expression tightening in concentration. There, he said suddenly, pointing at a section of data that shifted in irregular intervals. The signal is inconsistent, not absent. Another doctor nodded, his voice quick, engaged. It is being interrupted, not lost. The realization spread through the group, not loudly, but with a growing intensity, like a current running through each of them. The older doctor exhaled slowly, the last of his resistance dissolving into focus. Then we have been stabilizing the wrong system, he said, more to himself than anyone else. We have been treating the effect, not the cause. The man in the tailored suit stepped closer again, his presence no longer commanding the room, but drawn into it, his voice lower now. More human. Can you fix it? He asked, the question simple, but carrying everything with it. The younger doctor did not answer. Immediately, his eyes still locked on the data, calculating, weighing time against possibility. We can try, he said finally, and in that single sentence was both hope and risk, the kind that does not guarantee an outcome, but demands a decision. The older doctor straightened slightly, his voice firm once more, but different now, grounded in something real. Prepare to adjust the respiratory response protocol. He instructed, if the signal is being disrupted, then we need to support the completion of the cycle, not override it. The team moved quickly, coordinated now, not by hierarchy alone, but by shared understanding. The machines responded to new inputs, subtle changes made with precision. Every second measured, every movement deliberate. Naomi watched as the room transformed completely, from a place of conclusion to a place of possibility. And through it all, Kang Ji-hyun remained still, caught between two outcomes that had nearly been decided for him. The monitors continued their steady rhythm. But now, beneath the surface of numbers and sound, there is something else, something fragile, something waiting. And for the first time since she had entered the room, Naomi allowed herself to believe that what she had seen was not just different. It was the reason everything might change. The room moved with a precision that no longer came from routine, but from urgency sharpened by the realization that they had almost missed it. Every doctor now focused not on proving themselves right, but on correcting what had nearly been lost. The younger doctor adjusted the parameters again, his voice steady but faster now. We need to support the signal, not override it. Match his natural rhythm, not the machine's assumption. Another doctor nodded, already recalibrating the system. The soft hum of equipment shifting as new instructions took hold. The monitors flickered, numbers adjusting, searching for alignment with something deeper than program norms. The older doctor stood at the center again, but this time his authority did not silence the room. It guided it. Slow the intervention, he said firmly. Let the body complete what it is trying to do. The words carried weight now, not because they came from him, but because they were rooted in what they had all just witnessed. The man in the tailored suit stood closer than before, his hands no longer trembling, but clasped tightly in front of him, his eyes locked on Kang Ji-hyun, as if willing him back through sheer presence. Naomi remained near the edge of the bed, her posture still, her gaze unwavering. She did not understand every adjustment they were making, every technical term spoken in low, rapid exchanges, but she understood what mattered. They were finally listening, not just to the machines, but to him. The room quieted again. Not in defeat this time, but in concentration, every movement slowing as they waited for a response, seconds stretched, each one carrying more weight than the last. The monitor continued its steady rhythm, but something beneath it began to shift, subtle at first, almost imperceptible. The younger doctor leaned in, his eyes narrowing. "Wait," he said softly, not commanding, but noticing everyone stilled, their attention drawn to the same point. The rise of Kang Ji-hyun's chest, one breath, then another, and then the pause, but this time, something followed it. Not immediately, not perfectly, but there a continuation, a completion that had not been there before. The younger doctor exhaled sharply. "It is responding," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, but the words spread through the room like a spark. The older doctor stepped closer, his eyes fixed, searching for confirmation, and then he saw it too. The rhythm was not perfect, not stable yet, but it was changing, adapting, aligning with the adjustments they had made. "Maintain this," he instructed quickly, his tone controlled but urgent. "Do not disrupt the pattern." The team moved carefully, no sudden changes now, only measured responses, allowing the body to reclaim its own rhythm. Naomi's eyes softened slightly, not with relief yet, but with recognition. This was what she had seen, what she had felt before she understood it. The man in the tailored suit took a slow step closer to the bed, his voice lower than before, almost as if he did not want to disturb the fragile progress. "Ji-hyun," he said quietly, the name, carrying more than authority now, carrying something personal, something human. The room held still again, waiting, watching, and then it happened, not dramatic, not loud, but undeniable. Kang Ji-hyun's fingers moved again, this time not just a flicker, not just a twitch, but a slow, deliberate tightening, as if responding to something beyond the machines. The younger doctor's breath caught. "That is voluntary," he said. The certainty in his voice no longer questioned. The older doctor did not speak immediately, because for the first time, there was nothing to argue against, only something to witness. The monitors continued to adjust, the rhythm stabilizing further, each breath finding its completion more naturally. The room that had once prepared for an ending now stood in the presence of something else entirely, something fragile, something rebuilding itself in real time. And in the quiet center of it all, Naomi Carter stood still, unseen again by most, but no longer invisible to the truth that had just changed everything. No one spoke when the movement happened again, because this time it did not feel like something fragile or uncertain. It felt real, the kind of real that does not need confirmation. Kang Ji-hyun's fingers tightened once more, slower than before, but unmistakably deliberate. And the reaction in the room was not immediate noise. It was silence, a deep, collective stillness, as every person present recalibrated what they were witnessing. The younger doctor leaned in closer, his voice barely above a breath. He is responding consistently now, he said, not as a question, but as a statement grounded in evidence that no one could dismiss anymore. The monitors reflected it too, subtle changes becoming patterns, patterns becoming stability, the irregular pauses in his breathing smoothing into a rhythm that, while not perfect, was no longer failing. The older doctor stepped forward, his posture no longer defensive, but attentive, his eyes scanning both the patient and the data, aligning them. For the first time, maintain current support, he instructed, his voice calm, measured, do not force correction, allow adaptation. The words carried a different kind of authority now. One that did not come from certainty alone, but from the willingness to adjust. The team responded in sync, small refinements, careful monitoring, every action deliberate, every second observed. The man in the tailored suit moved even closer, standing beside the bed now, his gaze fixed on Kang Jae-hyun's face. Searching for more than numbers, searching for presence. Jae-hyun, he said again, quieter this time, as if speaking not to a patient, but to someone who might finally hear him. Naomi watched for where she stood, her hands now empty, her body still, but her attention fully anchored to the subtle shifts unfolding before her. She did not move forward, did not claim space that was not hers, but she did not look away either, because what was happening belonged to more than the people in suits and white coats. It belonged to the moment itself, the room that had once been filled with overlapping voices and controlled urgency now operated in near silence, broken only by the soft sounds of machines and the occasional quiet instruction. Time stretched again, but this time it did not feel like something slipping away. It felt like something returning, slowly, carefully, as if testing whether it was safe to come back. The younger doctor straightened slightly, his eyes still on the monitors, but his expression shifting, the tension easing just enough to reveal something else beneath it. Relief. The signal is stabilizing, he said, his voice steady. And this time no one challenged him because they could all see it. The older doctor exhaled slowly, a breath he had been holding without realizing it, his shoulders lowering just slightly. Continue observation, he said, but there was no urgency in it now. Only control. The kind that comes after chaos has been redirected. The man in the tailored suit finally allowed himself to release the tight hold of his hands, one of them moving to rest lightly against the edge of the bed, not touching, but close enough to feel present. And then, almost imperceptibly, Kang Ji-hyun's chest rose again, smoother this time, more complete. The pause that had once interrupted each breath, now fading into something natural, something whole. And in that quiet progression, the outcome that had been decided minutes ago no longer existed. It had been replaced by something else entirely, something none of them had expected to witness. Not because it was impossible, but because they had not been looking in the right place. Naomi's gaze softened, not with pride, not with triumph, but with a quiet understanding, because she had not changed anything herself. She had only seen what was already there, the truth that had been overlooked, and now, as the room slowly began to breathe again in sync with the man at its center, every person present understood something they would not say out loud, that the moment had not been saved by the most powerful or the most educated, but by the one person no one had thought to listen to. The room did not erupt into celebration. It did not fill with relieved voices or triumphant declarations. Instead, it settled into something far quieter, something heavier, the kind of silence that comes when people realize they have just witnessed a moment they will never fully explain. Kang Ji-hyun's breathing had found its rhythm now. Not perfect, not strong, but undeniably his. Each inhale completing itself without interruption. Each exhale steady and real. The monitors reflected the change. Clearly, no longer a fragile pattern held together by intervention, but a system beginning to support itself again, the younger. Doctor stepped back slowly, his eyes still fixed on the data, as if expecting it to disappear, but it did not. It held consistent, stable. He exhaled a breath he had not realized he was holding. "He is stabilizing," he said quietly, and this time the words did not carry doubt. They carried confirmation. The older doctor stood still for a moment longer, his gaze moving from the monitors to Kang Ji-hyun, and then, finally, to Naomi Carter. The shift was subtle, almost imperceptible, but it was there, the recognition that had not existed before. He did not speak immediately, because there was nothing he could say that would undo the moment that had just passed. The man in the tailored suit remained beside the bed, his posture no longer rigid, his presence no longer commanding, but grounded, human. He watched Kang Ji-hyun closely, as if memorizing the return of something he had almost lost, and then, slowly, almost cautiously, Kang Ji-hyun's eyes moved beneath his eyelids, a small shift, but enough to draw every gaze in the room. The younger doctor stepped forward again, his voice low but urgent. "Ji-hyun, can you hear me?" he said, not loudly, not forcefully, but clearly. The room held still once more, the kind of stillness that carries expectation rather than fear. And then, after a moment that stretched longer than any before it, Kang Ji-hyun's eyes opened. Not wide, not fully aware, but open enough to break the final illusion that he had been beyond reach. The reaction was not immediate noise. It was a collective intake of breath, the kind that happens when reality shifts in front of you. The man in the tailored suit leaned in slightly, his voice softer now. "You are back," he said, not as a command, not as a statement of power, but as something closer to relief. Kang Ji-hyun's gaze moved slowly, unfocused at first, then gradually settling, not on the doctors, not on the machines, but across the room, toward the place where Naomi stood, still quiet, as she had been from the beginning. Their eyes met for only a brief moment, but it was enough for something unspoken to pass between them, something that did not need words. The older doctor cleared his throat softly, stepping forward, his voice measured, but different now. "We will continue monitoring," he said, but his attention shifted again, briefly, toward Naomi. And this time, he did not look past her. He looked at her. The younger doctor followed that glance, and then another, until the weight of the room's attention settled on her once more, but not with dismissal, not with irritation, with something else entirely, something closer to acknowledgement. Naomi did not step forward, did not speak. She simply stood there, her presence unchanged, because she had never come into the room to be seen, only to do her work. And yet, in that quiet space, she had become the one person who saw what no one else did. The man in the tailored suit straightened slowly, his gaze still on Kang Ji-hyun, but his voice carrying across the room with calm authority. "Find out her name," he said, not loudly, but clearly enough that everyone heard it. And in that moment, no one questioned who he meant. The room remained still for a second longer, the weight of everything settling into place, the realization complete. And though no one said it out loud, every person in that room understood the truth that had just rewritten everything they believed, that the most important insight had not come from experience or status or authority, but from someone they had almost removed without a second thought. And that day, without raising her voice, without claiming credit, Naomi Carter showed them exactly what dignity looks like.